Please be seated. The sitting is open. For reasons duly made known to me, Judge Tomka is unable to sit with us for part of this morning. The court meets this morning to resume hearing the first round of oral argument of Myanmar. I now give the floor to Mr. Sam Blom Cooper. You have the floor, sir.
Distinguished members of the court, good morning. It is an honour and privilege to appear before you for the first time on behalf of Myanmar. My colleague, Ms. Laurie, and I will now address the Gambia's allegations of genocidal acts committed during the counter-terrorism operations in northern Rakhine State in 2016 and 2017. I will focus on events in and around three villages of Minji, Chutpin, and Maung Nu. Following this, Ms. Laurie will deal with the other 43 specific locations where the Gambia alleges acts of violence to have been committed. I refer to Minji, Chutpin, and Maung Nu as the main locations. This is because out of the 509 locations in northern Rakhine State, wholly or in part inhabited by Bengalis, the Gambia focuses predominantly on these three populations, the populations of which at the time, respectively, were 4,300, 1,200, and 4,600 people. Throughout these proceedings, the Gambia has repeatedly sought to claim that what happened in these three locations was typical and representative of what happened in many locations throughout northern Rakhine State. It claims repeatedly that there was a consistent pattern of conduct in 2016 and in 2017 from which a genocidal intent can be inferred. However, there is simply no basis for that claim. First, events in these three locations were not as alleged by the Gambia. Second, for the reasons to be addressed by Ms. Laurie, events in the vast majority of the other 43 locations referred to by the Gambia were of a completely different quality by way of alleged violence, and where loss of life was either minimal or even non-existent. As for the hundreds of other locations in northern Rakhine State, inhabited by Bengalis, the Gambia presents no evidence at all of any violence. As is apparent, there are many matters upon which the respective parties do not agree. But on the opening morning of these proceedings, I confess I was struck by a handful of words uttered by counsel for the Gambia with which I unreservedly do agree. Those words spoke of the, quote, particular obligation on counsel to be as careful as possible in dealing with the law and the facts. Those words have an important resonance throughout this case. They are words that guide what we say about the allegations in this case now, just as those words were central to the careful village-by-village analysis of each location in chapters 8 and 9 of Myanmar's counter-memorial. We know that the Gambia read those chapters because its reply then radically resiled from its unsubstantiated initial claims of, quote, hundreds of villages, unquote, being subject to a consistent pattern of conduct of extreme brutality and sexual violence. The Gambia's reply refers to just 13 locations. Before you, the Gambia now revises its claims once more. Last Monday, it suggested that its alleged pattern of extreme brutality, mass killings, rape and destruction took place in, quote, scores of villages across northern Rakhine State. By Wednesday, the Gambia had raised its claim to alleged genocidal attacks in 76 locations in August 2017, adding at least 30 alleged attacks without any evidential basis. This is not the carefulness trumpeted on that first morning, and it is antithetical to the rigour and care required in proceedings of such gravity. In relation to the three main locations, contrary to what the Gambia contends, there were significant ARSA attacks. The deployment of military force was necessary and justified. In the course of those operations, carried out within village settings where ARSA had elected to attack, there were casualties. Some of these may have resulted from a failure to distinguish clearly enough between ARSA and civilians not participating in the violence. That, however, is far removed from the genocidal conduct that the Gambia claims. Insofar as the allegations of sexual violence are concerned, such allegations arise predominantly from the events at Minji and Chutpin. It is difficult, given the nature of such alleged criminality, for Myanmar to discount the possibility of incidents of serious sexual assault. However, there is no reliable evidence of their widespread character, a matter to which I will return. However, such abhorrent conduct can never form part of any legitimate counter-terrorism operation. It was no part of any plan of Myanmar to cause or encourage such behaviour, and no one was authorised to order the use of any form of sexual violence, or indeed gratuitous physical violence, upon any person. The allegations of brutality, killing and rape recounted in the speeches last week was difficult to listen to, and if true, would amount to an appalling catalogue of criminal behaviour. It is, however, to be recalled that what those speeches describe is not established fact and cannot be subject in and by this court to the level of examination and investigation that such allegations demand. What weight you eventually place on the material is a matter for the court to determine, but it does not have and cannot reach the level of being fully conclusive evidence of the kind accepted in other similarly grave cases. The Gambia's claims in respect to the main locations are the product of unreliable and at times demonstrably dissembling accounts that have deliberately withheld the truth about what took place in August of 2017. It is an extraordinary feature of the Gambia's case as a whole, and in particular in relation to these three locations, that its witnesses so systematically and intentionally withheld all reference to the widespread presence and activities of ARSA throughout this period. Whether it be to ARSA's killing of Hindus, ethnic Mro, Dainet and Rakhine civilians, as well as the Myanmar security personnel, or to ARSA's many violent confrontations with the Myanmar Defence Services. The Gambia may well be able to produce a substantial volume of material alleging violence in these three locations. However, little or no weight can be given to that material for reasons given by Dr. Staker and Ms. Cordone and those that follow. The court will not conflate quantity with quality. In relation to all locations, the Gambia's claims of genocidal acts are refuted. Mr. President, Before addressing the events of August 2017 themselves, it is of importance to recall the compelling reason why military forces had to be deployed in northern Rakhine State at all. Anyone reading the Gambia's pleadings or listening to its presentations would be forgiven for thinking that the military simply descended like a wolf on the fold. Indeed, it is that impression that so many witnesses and the Gambia itself seeks to achieve. However, as has been explained in Myanmar's pleadings and by Ms. Laurie, military forces were there for an undeniable reason, namely ARSA, which repeatedly attacked military and police facilities, suborned the local Bengali population, murdered those who opposed them in their community, and killed other innocent non-Bengalis alike. There had been attacks by ARSA in the region in October and November of 2016, and ARSA was known to be planning further attacks. An increased presence in security forces in the region was therefore understandable, indeed inevitable. The evidence shows that ARSA initiated the violence with a series of attacks across northern Rakhine State, and that the military responded to it. No responsible sovereign state could or would sit back and permit such pervasive violence to go unchecked. Myanmar acted in necessity and justifiably to protect its citizens and the integrity of the state. The counter-terrorism operations against ARSA and its supporters were conducted only in locations where ARSA was active. That is a profoundly important point in this case. They were conducted not over months or years, but over a short period of time. Just 3 days in October of 2016, 2 days in November of 2016, and for just the last week of August and first days of September 2017. That was the full extent of the military operations, to be measured in days and undertaken in response to ARSA's widespread campaign of violence. The vast majority of Bengali villages and communities were not subject to any form of military intervention at all. Mr. President, members of the Court, I now turn to events in and around the first of the three main locations, namely Minji in Mongdor Township. To listen to the Gambia's presentation is to leave you with nothing but the sense that what occurred was no more than the unprovoked, unilateral use of unjustifiable military force upon a defenceless and peaceful civilian population. The totality of the evidence, however, shows that this was fundamentally not what occurred. Like many of the witnesses it relies upon, the Gambia omits any details about events that took place in and around this village in the hours, days, and weeks prior to 8 a.m. on the 30th of August 2017. The Gambia omits to mention that this was just 5 days after ARSA had commenced its coordinated attacks throughout northern Rakhine State. ARSA's latest campaign of violence had begun by the early hours of the 25th of August, with a focus on Mongdor Township. In the days leading up to the 30th of August, witnesses noted that there was, quote, a heavy ARSA presence in the Khao Man Zake area and surrounding village tracts, unquote, following ARSA's massacre of nearly 100 Hindus at Khao Man Zake itself, a village 10 kilometers up the Puma River Valley from Minji. Witnesses consistently described seeing large groups of ARSA fighters gathered in the village tracts of Tamanta, Titon Nagwason on the 25th of August and the days following. The Gambia's own witness, Andrew Riley, had himself noted the strong ARSA presence in that particular area. Military records show that 2 days later, some 300 Bengalis attacked and set fire to Thet Kaing Nya police post. Moving yet closer to Minji, the Independent International Fact-Finding Mission, the FFM, acknowledges that in the early hours of the 25th of August, ARSA attacked the Net Chaung police post that neighbours Minji, and that the following day, ARSA conducted a further attack on the Wat Jain police post. Each of these attacks is corroborated by Myanmar's own contemporaneous military reports, often recorded within hours of the events taking place, which detail the involvement in the attacks of up to 600 armed Bengalis from the surrounding villages of Labawar, Padakar, and Minji. Police officers fled from their posts at Net Chaung and Minji, which were both then burnt. The ARSA attacks in and around Minji were not confined to targeting state security entities, but also involved inflicting violence upon non-Bengali civilians and settlements. Following its massacre of the Hindus at Karmanzeg on the 28th of August, ARSA fighters attacked Wat Jain once more, detonating an IED and burning down 30 houses. The same day, it attacked the ethnic Mro population in the neighbouring village of Kudang, in respect of which satellite imagery corroborates the burning of some 40 homes by ARSA. Contemporaneous reports describe approximately 400 ARSA militants participating in the attack upon Kudang, during which they murdered 7 Mro villagers. A number of other Mro still remain unaccounted for. Mro villagers describe large numbers of Bengalis gathering on the road near Mayawadi village shortly before the events of the 30th of August. Many were armed with knives, swords, and guns. A witness account obtained by Fortify Rights, but removed by the Gambia from its own memorial hands, similarly confirms ARSA's attack on the Mro village of Padakar, immediately north of Minji.
Dian tulatuli ase tulatuli mare tara mukbandiar sai nobono zonindu mari phalaye hanko yore tara poyamitu.
The FFM reported that more than 600 structures
FFM report mare
destroyed.
in mention no gore.
During this period,
itara in ore dikkagoje then Bormay nato goriore hala hor hidayore nila mogorata marabai di hin FFM no tule ongoto.
On the 25th of August, during ARSA's attack upon the police checkpoint at Artet Puma village tract, south of Minji, with, quote, trailers of gunfire passing in each direction.
Ate Puma mare majide hin or
ARSA freely and publicly acknowledged responsibility for the attack. Hundreds of Rakhine villagers fled, leaving ARSA to burn down the entire village, both Rakhine and
Faratia Mogor Badin Okolor Rohingya Kolor Farakol Furadie Arsaye Ngod.
This even went beyond the instruction broadcast widely by ARSA's leader, Ataullah, to his followers, quote, burn down all Rakhine villages. Do not spare
Mogor Fara Begilin Sabgor Yoro Furade Fellow and Koyore order die Begilore Oindo and Koyore Murumor Vara Bade Summer Vara Zin Mogor Vara Sim Begilum Furade Fellow and Koyra Taulaya order die and Koy Nayamaliana or the Hazard,
where hundreds of ARSA-led fighters engaged in violence. Miss Laurie will address the court on the events in and around the villages of Rida, Don Paik, Jain Chaung, and Laung Don.
Non in her Hindumain Mongdur Uttur Farahim Begilinore Arsai Furadian or Taraturutun Hotilia.
In Minji itself. Contemporaneous military records corroborate eyewitness testimony in describing repeated clashes involving groups of hundreds of Bengalis, often armed with knives, swords, and IEDs.
শতাশতি বাঙালি সকলে ছুরি দল লাড়ি হিনলেরে
which the
দিন
Gambia accepts
মুসলমান ধর্ম নয় হিনরে কতলা আমগজ্জেং
warning shots were fired in repeated attempts
দিন সিকিউরিটি ফোর্স সকলা সিহি তারা ওয়ার্নিং হিসাবে আউতোর মিকে মাঝে যেত তারা নামানের আমতোর সুর তারা ইও যদি তারা সাব করা শুরু করছে
the military continued to be fired upon until well into the evening of the 30th of August before attackers
অগস্ট 30 তারিখ মারা হাজিনা পর্যন্ত মারা তাশিল লড়াই আসছিলেন
Mr. President, despite all of the matters that I have described in and around Minji, not a single word of this is mentioned by any of the Gambia's witnesses.
endillare du mabloy di hino mare gambia ye kadada no ho ar din double ffm ino mare hamika mention no gore itara bos banay dikka goriyor report ashide anala bormay na mane
Worldwide, which were provided years after these events took place, positively denies any suggestion whatsoever of armed activity by even a single Bengali, or even the presence
oggo bangali
of
torbotun odda din tarar atiya doriyor activity go jodi hinore double hom torbotun honokada mention no gore ffm torbotun mention no gore di analla
by the FN.
e gambia iyo hinore zahir no gore আর ইতার আবাস বানা দেশের ভিতরে হালতর মুঠি করি গজ্জে দেন এফএফএম এর রিপোর্ট মোতাবেক গজ্জে দিয়ে হিসাবে তারা হি নম্বরে সব তত্ত্ব দিন আর তারা দিন নাকি পাড়া অকল জাগা অকল দাহাই দিয়ে হি তারা ন জানে নসিনে ন যা হি নরে তারা ইয়ানি নজরিয়া বাফা মোতাবেক তারা গজ্জে দিয়ে ইনকর নয়া ফিলিং উত্তর করিয়র গজ্জে দিয়ে এনকয়রে
For the Gambia's witnesses so systematically hiding the truth.
সই দিন আসি নরে তারা সাসু তোরা করিয়র কানুন মুন্দু লয় বলা কোশিশ করে
And control of those witnesses presented to organizations who interviewed or took statements from them. Second, fear of ARSA or loyalty to ARSA, as described by Ms. Laurie, is so entrenched that those
আরসার ডরে আরসার ইমানদারি আরসার সাপোর্ট করে দিয়ে তারা ইমানদারির সাথে আর কিছু সাপোর্ট ন করলেও ডরে দিল্লা দিন এফএফএম এর রিপোর্ট দিয়ে দিহিন আরসা ইয়ে দিন দিল্লা দিতে হইয়ে এন্দিল্লা গরিয়র দিয়ে দে ইনে দিক্কা গরিয়র দিয়ে দে
When this fundamental evidential deficiency, indeed an absurdity, was highlighted by Myanmar, the Gambia attempted to address it by annexing to its reply a witness statement from the Bengali former deputy chairman of Minji, witness P1299, obtained by the independent
মেনজি তোলা তুলি দিব 2 নম্বর
the IIF.
ওচিমো আছে হিতার বয়ান মোতাবেক বর্মাইয়ে হি নরে আইসিজে কোড়র সব তত্ত্ব হিসাবে দিয়ে
As to the reliability of evidence presented in this case. P1299 accepts in this statement that there was indeed a series of violent attacks in and around Minji by what he described as a Muslims group.
তোলা তুলি মারে জিন মাঝে কতলা আমগজি হি নর পুরা ডিটেল সাথে বর্মাইয়ে এ রিপোর্ট মারে জাহির গজিয়ে
Was that this same person had previously given one of the 21 witness statements given to legal
অদদে তে 2 নম্বর হইছে মহিতে আরো 21 পর্যন্ত মানজতুন বয়ানক লয়রে বর্মার হুকুমতর দিয়ে জিনরে পুরো মারে হাজির গজি
was undoubtedly the result of the pervasive anonymity that characterizes this case. In the earlier statement, P1299 had denied any knowledge of ARSA activity in the area. His later IIMM statement reveals not only that he had lied in his earlier statement, but discloses the reason for having done so. Quote, "I can't speak about the names of the people in this group. It is not possible for me to speak about this. These people
Ara arsa dorozoriya kesu awas tulina wari ar barmare boyandina wari tara ara awas dile ara kala bulio hoy arare maribolla aye ehon Bangladesh mario tara nazam gojje zina zoriya ara hono boyandina wari ar sai zendilla hoy bolla detail dahai diye he mutabak ara gojji de
which fundamentally taints the integrity of testimony emanating from the camps. Namely,
Yanallah zini ki sobutottoro gawashaki dahaye in azadisateno arzono sabozoriya diede in boyan soyinobo kanunam namanibo inora azadisate reporto hoine bhari
which is so central to its case, is variously said to be corroborated by or consistent with other witness testimony. These are virtually meaningless phrases when dealing with anonymous testimony, as it simply cannot be known whether one account is simply corroborating another account given to a different organization but by the same person. The case of P1299 is a stark and salutary lesson of this. And nor is anonymity cured by noting that the evidence comes from, quote, independent organizations. Their independence has no bearing, as such organizations themselves
organization zini ki report zahir gojje FFM tun iba independent no yani azadi sate gojje no tarar mancha mutabek tara udun alliance goriyore ar sallai hatabattara hoy nilla goriyore gojje de ibar independent no hoibo yan Allah UN kobul golliyo puro kobul no kore kanun hodi be kobul no kore.
Upon analysis of his evidence, however,
Former Manyude, Azar Patala Am Gulio Gorogo, international law, Mare Rohingya Hodihin, Kanun Urbutorno, protected group no, in the Lahoyer Taran Nozoria, the Eurosolar, are international law, Mare Rohingya Hodin, no Bole, Rohingya Komor, Patala Angulio, Junior Kanun, Tudaranavure, Guragura Vara, called Guragura Tono, Colomaro of the Mavalahin, Junior Kanun, Manodori. Hank Hoyore, Kuroturutun, and the Funatihin of Mari, Dunia as part of Protobutun, Bushoyer, Barmari job, the other Hazard. International law, the Basi, Vare, Harekzanola, Banaye, Biglinore, Sundur Goriore, Goriballa. Harekzon, Dunia Maras, Dunasi, Itala. কিন্তু রোহিঙ্গা ক্রম আরমরি বলা তারা খুশি কইলিও দুনিয়া ইগনো নগরে তো
750 people at Minji. The FFM acknowledges, however,
এটা মগে কমেন্ট করতে এটা আরে দাহাতে রোহিঙ্গা বর্মামারে নাই গয়র তারা বারবার হত আসিয়া রোহিঙ্গা নাই হেং গদিয়ান তো তোমারা হতে হিস্টরি নহর হিস্টরি হতে রোহিঙ্গা আছে আর কান
in a figure of well over 200.
Menjir Mavalamare, then Amnesty International Torbutun report Nialaye, Inore Jagore, Yani Tara 45 days sorry, be a fun like it for me. 45 days sorry, but the Tia Layer Besa, the Go organization, Eva Kuromara has read the hazard. In the look at the rail, the Suki Hamala, Valabo, Mundu, Vayara, Kushi, Gujina, Variango, Voyatan of Idea Kanuni.
Critically, however, these estimates are death tolls and are limited in what they can reveal. They do not represent.
Ede din comment gorer beshadia Rohingya nai bulio hoy beshadia mock. E mock ine e Bengali hojo chora nidar goi. Ede dibani ki gya Burma Ministry of Justice ase ibe hode a time mare ebaram mare zin military council argument goji hi ba sasu dara goriyor dunia ro hoy diye hindilla goriyor yara gor hukumat onsul juro hukumate dinaware hang hoyo yani ki sasu dara goriyor Bengali hobala yang wadiriye.
Mr. President, members of the court, I now turn to address the second of the main locations, Chutpin in Rakhine.
Chupengor Mavalar Bavote, ite hor. In order Tara, Bishi detail of Sada Gorior Panauti, Gorior Ligia, Pakias, the Rohingya, in order Taratun, Botilla Gorior Alan Goji, at a Jibaniki American citizen of Guazade, his man Jibaniki Assi, killed his man. iti board dilla goriyor banauti goriyor video call banaiya ar hite hon Burmar direct official website mare Reuters hisaba hamo gore
widespread reluctance
itare America tun ban gojje America dolla bole head সকল মুসলমানের খেলাফ করে দিয়ে হিসাবে তারা আমেরিকা তরফতুন নিয়ালা দিয়ে কিন্তু বর্মা থেকে সিটিজেন লইয়ে আমেরিকা সিটিজেন এনে হয় যে কিন্তু তারে আমেরিকা তো নিয়ালা দিয়ে তার টুইটার ফেসবুক ইন্টারনেট বন্ধ করে দিল
What the totality of the evidence demonstrates is that Myanmar responded to ARSA violence in and around the village in order to
Chupion mare arsar hamlare military paraleoklore হেফাজত করি বল্লা জবাব দিয়ে paraleoklore arse marde hede military যাইরে হেফাজত গজে গদিয়ে এনকোয়রে তারা বহিয়ানদের
The area in and around Chukpin had been a hotbed of ARSA activity, certainly since May 2017 onwards, with ARSA camps established near the village, where tactical and weapons trainings had taken place. As late August 2017 approached, ARSA's preparations intensified, with Chukpin representing a particularly important foothold for its fighters amid heightened tensions in Rathidong Township.
Burmai tare naya okil naya kariya gajide
Security forces arrested 8 men in Chukpin.
Chukpin to 8 জন পর্যন্ত মিলিটারি মানুষ আরেস্ট গজে টেররিজম অ্যাক্ট মোতাবেক আর ইতারাতুন ভয়ানক কল স্টেটমেন্ট কল লইদি হিনরিও আসিল
campaign of genocidal violence had already begun some 9 months earlier. Days later, an ethnic Rakhine was killed. The suspected victim
আষ্টজনইনে বেশা বেশি মহকল মাইজিদি হিনর তারা বয়ান নিজে বাজে কবুল গজিদি হিনরিও দিয়ে
The FFM describes how, quote, the military and border guard police intervened.
BJP the military
Unquote.
Chup Umar Majidi Hin FFM Mare the Haye Zinore
Security services
Arsai Gojidi no the Ha
were found killed. 2 of them had been decapitated. The ARSA camp of those responsible was found in the nearby hills shortly afterwards. When ARSA launched its August 2017 offensive, it did so in proximity to Chukpin and within the village itself. The map shows Chukpin centrally located, close to the intersection of the 3 townships, where southern parts of Mongdo and Buthidong abut northwestern Rathidong Township. On the 25th of August, at around 3:30 a.m., Hwason police post was attacked by about 300 armed militants. Police officers responded by firing back at the group to repel the assault. Some 15 minutes later, Tin Bo Hue police post, west of Chukpin, was attacked by about 250
Timbokwe Chopendu Baden Den Gosong Bade Tawinchong Zin Farakol Azisho Pyungor Atehase Bade Mongdo Bade Radidong Budidong Mazamaja Yani Ki Tin Dilaguri or Indian Radidong the Budidong Mazamaja Nilotto.
Police officers. The FFM noted it to be a particularly intense clash, with continuous gunfire heard throughout the early hours of the 25th of August. In a similar vein, further ARSA attacks were carried out at Kyauk Pandu and at Alethankyo, where hundreds
Chopendu Maragojang or Aledenjo Thor. Tora Aledenjo Maro Hodi Neto Gojida Dahanoza. Tora in Hor. Don't Donatia Kanati Aledenjo Maratia, Guedono Zabazi, or a din Banauti Koror.
later, on the 27th of
Dear Zonofuru Ligato Rari.
commenced its attack upon Chukpin, detonating IEDs at the police station. When security services arrived to conduct a search of the village for the attackers, they were surrounded by a group of some 80 ARSA fighters. Simultaneously, there was a second and much larger offensive within Chutpin, involving approximately
Chupimare Gazin military ase itara Faramara Saigit Gundere, Faramada Thomas Igore, Saira Gutton, Arsa member Unojon Hujon the Yegi, the Rio Majidi, and Omare Joab, Don Mare, and the Larse, Maramare, Faracho, Radivala, and the Lahore. Begin document Gujase
reports and by testimony of military personnel, which confirms that defensive force was deployed proportionately and in accordance with the applicable rules of engagement, and in order to ward off attackers armed with swords, grenades, and guns. Significantly, Arsa's attacks are yet further corroborated by signed witness statements of local Bengalis themselves. 3 Arsa fighters all describe their own recruitment by local religious leaders, their training, and ultimately their
Parayan to Tinjan Vujanta Arsa member the Jezine, Faradatiare, Trinio called the Hamla called Gorivala, Toriko called the Hadi and the Tinjando Jidino to report call Haya, Tara, mobile tone and the video call of Hayi and Hoira.
And Chutpin itself.
Chupangot Nilimbo, but
self-interest in respect of their involvement. The third witness even places blame on Arsa for the coercive manner in which he himself was recruited into Arsa's violence. While Myanmar bears no burden to prove so, it is beyond doubt that Arsa reported on the 27th of August.
Bondishnai Mawalainara prove Goronor Kelawale, Bormatu Sovo Harakada, Harinsir, Harzagar, Asi.
Myanmar's contemporaneous and mutually cooperative strands of witness testimony and documentary
Kawasaki document, the video statement, audio statement, Biglin, Bormaya, Harakada Varar, Harakzonutun, Boyanokol, Yore Raki.
All mention of Arsa or any violence by
Biglin, Beshadia, Arsai Gojide, Arbeshadia, Arsara Saburgor, the Hitara, Farao, Call Furadio, Regi, Godi.
Gambia did not even
Bangladesh, the Igodi, Begin Arsa, Arsai Furadio,
regarding events at Chutpin.
Arkanutun, Bangladesh, the Igodi, Bangladesh, Mare Faida Havan.
Such statements, the earliest of which is dated October 2022, more than 5 years after the events in question. None of these accounts are either contemporaneous in nature or uninfluenced by the presence of Arsa in the camps of Bangladesh. Here, the dangers of relying upon the Gambia's anonymous witness evidence is once again demonstrated.
Gambia Tarutun, then Savutra, the Gavashaki, Nialai, and Hona die, Gava, Hona die, nor Fatana.
526.
Andas Guriore, Banautile, Gojidi. Uramare Banauti, Dandas Guridi Navare, practically Garavre.
Some 7 years after the events in question, the same person gave a witness statement to the same organization. This is one of only 4 instances in a case involving many hundreds of witnesses where it has been possible to compare 2 witness statements given by the same person. In the case of this witness, the contradictions and inconsistencies between the 2 accounts are stark and fundamental. So much so that before you last week, the Gambia simply abandoned this witness altogether during its presentation. The implications of this evidential episode cannot be swept under the carpet so lightly. It provides this court with a powerful example of how an untruthful witness can mislead investigators.
Itarare Hosurdi Vadana, Itarare Bormai, Zendilla Goriore, Leki
No realistic prospect of scrutiny of their
Zendilla
account.
Goriore Hodo.
And this applies to
Tara,
virtually
Zin
every
Leki
single
for
witness in the Gambia's entire case. The FFM interviewed 50 eyewitnesses in relation to the events in Chutpin, just as with the events in Minji. Not a single one of these 50 interviewees is said to have made any mention of the undeniable presence of Arsa and its violent activities. Remarkably, or perhaps not, The same is true of the 23 anonymized summary accounts obtained by Legal Action Worldwide that were specially prepared for these proceedings 3 years after the events. Not a single one of these anonymized summary accounts utters a word about Arthur either. Such coordinated and contrived silence cannot be coincidental. It cannot have had any other purpose than to mislead. And it is obvious why the Gambia avoids the IIMM witness testimony from Chut Pin. It reveals a quite different picture of the military's conduct. One such Bengali witness says as follows, quote, "The military also planted mines around the village and along the road. They would tell us that we had a mine planted next to our village. No individual died by these mines. Because of the warnings, villagers stayed away." Unquote. Militaries don't attack ladies. Many ladies told us that during the attack they were shown their way. Unquote. They let go everyone who wanted to go to Bangladesh. That was the only direction where people were allowed to move. Unquote. The Gambia's criticism of Myanmar's careful analysis of the evidence in response
Gambia hota mutabik military fara sare da kan hasa jinni ki mind bomb call kan rahi in
microscope at isolated discrepancies.
sarasar misa in
That is the
no
very exercise that compelled the Gambia to abandon one of its
Burman
witnesses.
military kan no sundor gori mane are nor pura goje systematically professional hisabe goje
material that Myanmar produces on the basis that it is said to be self-serving. One wonders how then the Gambia envisages any state might defend itself in proceedings such as these. In essence, what they seem to say is this: don't look too closely, don't probe too much, just accept what we say. That, however, is not how allegations of the utmost gravity are to be approached. So far as the number of fatalities is concerned, Myanmar's contemporaneous witness evidence indicates that 32 ARSA fighters were killed at Chut Pin. In contrast, the Gambia adopts the FFM's unverified figure of 358 deaths, which comes from
majidi military maje begla arsar video tulides
necessarily the FFM is explicit.
galak tada thaile bana sabale odno ere dunia yo horo
As with Minji,
Gambia ro gilo class de hitara zin hor in bod bana kalor moza marde
are said
hote
to
da
have been intentionally killed, which is ultimately what this court must assess, and do so with the rigour that allegations of genocide demand. Mr. President, I turn now to the third and final of the three main locations, namely Mongdor in Bufidong Township. The Gambia's written and oral analyses of events in Maungnu avoid all reference to any event prior to 10 a.m. on the 27th of August.
ya monoharar mawalar babote hor
While the Gambia may ignore it, it does not
monohar amar hon torikalere military majidi Gambia yu pura detail di tei nare taratun hondilla gorioro abe job din arsar mataro tuli dia or in udum banaya asde
in the days
in
prior
ore
to, during,
dahar
and
diri
after the 27th of August. As with Minji and Chut Pin, the Gambia persists in stripping all context from its narrative of events. This misleading approach is now compounded further by 1. The Gambia's deliberate decision to avoid the testimony of the IIMM witnesses, to whom I shall return shortly, and 2.
zururi kanun ji mawla se inshallah onara mundu zahir koriyo
Of the evidence as a
ei
whole.
number ka aga visa bestomo
I will also return in due course. Coupled with its heavy reliance on anonymous summary hearsay notes of evidence from secondary sources, the Gambia can only present a distorted and incomplete impression of events. What is not seriously disputed about events in and around Maungnu is the following. As part of its coordinated campaign of attacks on some 30 border guard posts and one military headquarters across northern Rakhine State, ARSA attacked the border guard post at Paung Tor Pin, during the course of which 2 police officers were killed and a medical assistant slashed severely with knives. Simultaneously, ARSA carried out 2 other attacks in the immediate vicinity. The first was the army headquarters occupied by the number 552 Light Infantry Regiment near Town Bazaar, to the north of Maung Nu. This was a major target. The second was against the border guard post in Nagar Chant Yanchang village tract. The attack upon the army base involved some 200 ARSA fighters, many of whom had been hiding in the villages of Tinganet and Su Town. When border guard police went to investigate at Tinganet, they too were attacked and IEDs were detonated. ARSA then set fire to 50 houses before moving on to Su Town. Ultimately, the villages of Tinganet, Su Town, Don Pike, and Kon Town were all burned by ARSA militants. To the extent that the Gambia has sought to portray ARSA as inadequately armed for serious violence, this is flatly undermined by Bengali testimony, which the Gambia itself elected to remove from its own annex. This was not material initially in Myanmar's possession. Inevitably, this evidence coheres with Myanmar's contemporaneous operational reports. Referring to ARSA by its former name, the witness states, quote, "The Al Yaqin group blasted a bomb in Tinganet. There were 800 Al Yaqin gathered near the forest, near the mountainside. There were more than 250 Al Yaqin members in the village when the bomb blasted. Almost each person had a bomb. I saw more than 200 people, each with one knife and one bomb." Unquote. Following these initial attacks, ARSA militants began to assemble in Maung Nu itself throughout the 26th of August, and also in nearby Maung Ji Town, where 1 month earlier a cache of ARSA weapons had been discovered. On the morning of the 27th of August, while en route to Maung Ji Town, the number 562 Light Infantry Regiment was confronted at Sino Pin, south of Maung Nu, by some 300 ARSA fighters, who were further bolstered by hundreds of local armed villagers. Soldiers were fired upon and returned fire. That is what is recorded in Myanmar's contemporaneous records of the incident. And the Gambia cannot deny this incident, not least because it invites you to accept the evidence of its own witness, P5513, who corroborates these facts. He estimated that the group numbering somewhere between 300 and 500 armed attackers. This is yet further corroborated by a local villager who witnessed the group attack and burn 82 houses in the village. Following ARSA's attack 2 days earlier on Paung Tor Pin, the number 234 Light Infantry Regiment returned to the village to establish security. They were, however, attacked by ARSA fighters who detonated explosive devices. A separate group of militants, who had also been involved in the Paung Tor Pin attack, were then reported to have taken up position around Maung Nu village, and so a company of the number 564 Light Infantry Regiment moved to Maung Nu at about 10 a.m., but were quickly attacked by a group of about 100 militants who detonated IEDs. Despite initially retreating when warning shots were fired, the group of attackers, now numbering about 300, returned to attack once more. Myanmar rejects the characterization that what occurred in Maung Nu was an unprovoked, unilateral attack by the security forces upon a passive Bengali population. The available evidence shows that the security operations in Maung Nu were focused upon ARSA cell leader Zahid Hussain and his home address. This was not an indiscriminate attack upon the population of Maung Nu more generally. I stated earlier that allegations of sexual violence arise predominantly from allegations at Minji and Chut Pin. Due to the nature of the crime, I reiterate that Myanmar cannot discount the possibility of shameful isolated incidents, though if they ever did occur, they would run counter to the ethos of the Myanmar Defence Services. Maung Nu is now included in the Gambia's allegations of widespread sexual violence, though it made no such allegation in its memorial. Belatedly, it refers to anonymous hearsay accounts from FFM witnesses concerning 3 incidents of rape or multiple rape in unknown locations. Each allegation is uncorroborated. Such tenuous summary evidence cannot be given any evidential weight. More generally, the Gambia yet again relies upon overwhelmingly anonymous, untested, and in very large part, hearsay summary accounts given by persons who were interviewed by the FFM, Legal Action Worldwide, and other organisations. In the now familiar pattern, not one of the 27 witnesses interviewed by the FFM about Maung Nu is recorded as having made any mention whatsoever of the activities or even presence of ARSA. The same confected silence is adopted by each of Legal Action Worldwide's 6 clients, who have specially prepared signed statements for these proceedings. The sole reference to ARSA in one of these 6 statements is the claim, quote, "In our area, ARSA don't exist," unquote. The Gambia has annexed to its pleadings only one of the 4 relevant witness statements provided to the parties by the IIMM, heralding witness P1244 as corroborative of another witness account obtained by Legal Action Worldwide. Since then, however, the Gambia has come to realise that its new witness is in fact the same person as the Legal Action Worldwide statement for which it was said to have been corroborative. This not only represents yet another prime example of the dangers of ubiquitous anonymisation, which not even the Gambia itself had been able to detect, but it also provides another of the 4 instances where Myanmar and this court can compare multiple accounts given over time by the same witness. It does not surprise Myanmar that witness P1244 manifestly lied in his 2020 statement when initially telling Legal Action Worldwide that ARSA did not exist in and around Maung Nu, and that he had never seen or heard of them. This cannot be another isolated example, given that the Gambia itself does not know the true identity of the vast majority of the witnesses it relies upon. It is clear why the Gambia avoids the other 3 IIMM witness statements provided to the parties. Witness P1496, a Bengali man, gives an important description of ARSA's presence and the murderous activities of ARSA cell leader Zahid Hussain and others in and around Maung Nu in August of 2017, and his fears of speaking out openly about ARSA. His warning to the IIMM bears out an important theme that permeates much of this case. Quote, "I believe that people who are members of ARSA may come to speak to your organisation and will share false information with you." Despite his detailed account of the structure of ARSA in Maung Nu and its conscription of many young acolytes through the local village mosque, this protected witness, like witness P1244, nevertheless still refuses to disclose the names of certain ARSA members. This court will appreciate why, given that his account includes ARSA's murder of a fellow informant, like him, shortly prior to its August attacks. ARSA members from Maung Nu had cut the informant's throat, placed him in a sack, and then thrown him down a hill. So far as fatalities in and around the area of Maung Nu is concerned, Myanmar's contemporaneous reports record that 15 terrorists died during clashes with Myanmar Defence Services. This was out of a population of approximately 4,600. The actual population data is available, so we need not trouble with the Gambia's crude calculation by reference to the number of households. By contrast, the FFM relies on anonymous hearsay sources to claim that 48 people from Maung Nu and 34 people from Paung Tor Pin, respectively, were killed. As before, the FFM cannot confirm the accuracy of these figures. Importantly, the FFM's figures, again, do not indicate the number of deaths, if any, that are said to have been the result of intentional killings and as falling within Article 2. Finally, I would ask the Court to consider whether the generalised descriptions that you have heard about the Gambia's third main location truly reflects the hard reality of the evidence. Last week, the Gambia told this court that, quote, the Tatmadaw burned Maung Nu to the ground in the days following the clearance operation, unquote. Its memorial similarly left no ambiguity. Maung Nu was completely destroyed during the clearance operation. I want briefly to examine that proposition now and the meaning of completely destroyed. The first image is the satellite view of Maung Nu 3 months before the 27th of August 2017, showing no damage to structures and shows houses with dark roofs. The second image was taken 2 months after the alleged destruction and is similarly relied upon by the Gambia. The houses certainly now appear light brown, perhaps all systematically burnt, as the Gambia suggests. But I ask you to peer more closely. What you will see is that, save for a small number of structures within the white box marked up by the FFM, the village is far from being completely destroyed. This imagery may not be entirely clear, so let me extinguish any lingering doubts. The third image is taken 3 months later. The season has changed, but it is clear that the houses of Maung Nu were never destroyed completely, and indeed are intact. And this is consistent with both IIMM and Myanmar's witness testimony. In due course, this court may wish to consider whether the words completely destroyed fairly and accurately reflect what really matters in this case, which is the evidence itself. That is as true for the events in Maung Nu as it is for each and every other location where allegations of genocide are claimed. Mr. President, members of the court, let me close this chapter with 6 points in respect of the 3 main locations that will also apply to the remaining locations to be examined. First, it is indisputable that the use of force by Myanmar Defence Services in northern Rakhine State in August 2017 was directly responsive to ARSA-led violence against civilians and state security personnel. Second, the use of force by Myanmar Defence Services was only deployed in or proximate to those specific locations where ARSA was present and active. Third, it is not disputed that rules of engagement, accepted as being consistent with international standards, were distributed to security services personnel prior to engagement with ARSA and its mobilised supporters. Fourth, the Gambia's claims of atrocities are overwhelmingly found in untested and anonymous witness statements and records of interviews that uniformly present a false narrative of the events, that deliberately omit all mention of the role of ARSA. Where multiple statements from a single witness have been made available to compare, there are fundamental issues of unreliability or even evidence of lies. Fifth, the fatality figures advanced by the Gambia do not accurately reflect the evidence. Moreover, they do not distinguish between those casualties who were ARSA fighters actively participating in the violence, those who were unintentional collateral casualties of the fighting, and those who were allegedly innocent civilians who were intentionally killed or harmed. Sixth, events in Minji, Chukpin, and Malnu were not typical of events during the counter-terrorism operations elsewhere in northern Rakhine State. And as Ms. Laurie will demonstrate this afternoon, there was no consistent pattern of conduct throughout northern Rakhine State, mirroring what occurred in these three main locations. While fatalities in these three main locations were high relative to other locations, it cannot be ignored that they were the scenes of some of ARSA's most deadly violence and intense clashes with Myanmar Defence Services. Mr. President, that concludes my presentation, and I thank you for your kind attention. I now kindly ask you to call upon Dr. Staker, who will address the court upon the evidential weight of material.
I thank Mr. Blum Cooper for his statement. I now invite Mr. Christopher Staker to address the court. You have the floor, sir.
Mr. President, Madam Vice President, members of the court, on Friday I addressed the evidential weight of the reports of the FFM. This morning I will deal with the evidential weight of the other material relied on by the Gambia, which is the subject matter of Chapter 7 of Myanmar's 2 written pleadings. I emphasize again that this topic is dealt with in far more detail in the written pleadings. Other than the FFM reports, the documents relied on by the Gambia as evidence of the claimed events of 2016 and 2017 consist primarily of witness statements, interview records, reports and documents of United Nations and other official bodies and NGOs, and media articles. The Gambia also relies on an expert report of Professor Newton, but given that Professor Newton is to be called to be examined orally, I will reserve observations on his evidence to the second round. Myanmar's written pleadings address individually each annex cited as evidence in the chapters of the Gambia's pleadings relating to the claimed events of 2016 and 2017. The points made in Chapter 7 of the written pleadings will also apply as relevant to other material relied on elsewhere in the Gambia's written pleadings. Myanmar says that, as in the case of the FFM reports, little or no weight can be given to any of the other material relied on by the Gambia to prove the core facts central to its claim of genocide. I begin by noting two overarching features of the body of other evidence relied on by the Gambia, which it shares with the FFM reports. The first is this: in all of this other material, as in the FFM reports, the information concerning alleged atrocities overwhelmingly has as its ultimate source people living in the camps in Bangladesh. The witness statements are largely from people in the camps in Bangladesh, and the reports of United Nations and official bodies and NGOs like the FFM reports, are largely based on interviews of people in the camps in Bangladesh. The second of the overarching features is this. In all of this material, those providing the information are almost entirely anonymous. As I said on Friday, the FFM interviewed hundreds of witnesses, and virtually all of them are anonymous. In the reports and documents of United Nations and other official bodies and NGOs, the sources of information about atrocities are also largely anonymous. With rare exception, even the witness statements provided by the IIMM are redacted to conceal identities. And that is truly remarkable, because the IIMM is meant to be producing evidence for use in judicial proceedings. And it's difficult to see what use can be made in judicial proceedings of anonymous witness statements. The witness statements prepared by Legal Action Worldwide were also originally annexed to the Gambia's written pleadings in anonymised form. After the written pleadings closed, the Gambia filed new versions of 15 of these witness statements so that they now disclose the identities of these 15 witnesses. By doing this, the Gambia appears to acknowledge that anonymous witness statements lack evidential weight. However, the fact remains that many of the Legal Action Worldwide witness statements are still anonymous. And the fact furthermore remains that the body of witness evidence as a whole remains overwhelmingly anonymous if one has regard to the hundreds of persons interviewed by the FFM and all the people spoken to by all the different bodies and organisations that produced the various reports and documents on which the Gambia relies. Neither the parties nor the court has any idea who the vast majority of these people are. The consequence of these overarching features is this. First, due to the presence and influence of ARSA in the camps in Bangladesh, it's unlikely that anyone living there would give an account contradicting the ARSA narrative. Some living there will be members of or sympathisers of ARSA, while others live in fear of ARSA. In either case, either loyalty to ARSA or fear of ARSA, or a combination of both, will make it unlikely that accounts are true and objective. Ms. Laurie has already dealt with this. ARSA has attacked and even killed others in the camps who oppose its views. This is an acknowledged fact. It's acknowledged by Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, the International Crisis Group, and the Bangladesh Police. It's reported in the international media. A Legal Action Worldwide witness statement says that there is no security in the camps and no one is safe there. I'm concerned that something might happen. As you've already heard, at least 2 IIMM witnesses, when asked about those responsible for the ARSA attacks in northern Rakhine State, have stated openly that they're not able to speak about this because those concerned are present in the camps. The court's settled case law acknowledges that the evidential weight of witness statements is diminished significantly if the witness is not disinterested. Although ARSA is not a party to these proceedings, an eyewitness who is loyal to ARSA has an interest in the outcome of the proceedings in a way similar to a state official of a party to the case. As regards those who live in fear of ARSA, to use the words of the court in Armed Activities, whether or not their statements were obtained under duress, the setting and context cannot be regarded as conducive to impartiality. Furthermore, those in the camps may have a more personal interest in the proceedings, whether supporters of ARSA or not. One of the Legal Action Worldwide witness statements says expressly, with reference to these proceedings, "I hope that we will win our case." Others express hopes that these proceedings will lead to them obtaining citizenship or official recognition of the name Rohingya, which, as I showed on Friday, are outcomes sought by the Gambia in this case. Legal Action Worldwide describes the witnesses from which it took witness statements as its clients. It appears that the clients sign a power of attorney stating that Legal Action Worldwide will act as my legal representative in relation to the proceedings before the International Court of Justice. The Legal Action Worldwide witnesses thus see themselves as legally represented participants in the proceedings. This is at least as great a personal interest as that of the Fisher people, whose statements were not given weight in previous cases concerning maritime spaces. As to the extensive anonymity of witnesses, this undermines evidential weight in two ways in particular in these proceedings. First, anonymity prevents any kind of background checks of those giving the information. A background check might reveal, for instance, that a claimed eyewitness was not from the village that they claimed to be from, or was not there at the material time, or was a member of ARSA actively participating in the violence. Secondly, anonymity prevents it from being known what documents relied on by the Gambia are in fact based on the same information from the same people. For instance, one of the anonymous IIMM witness statements might in fact be given by the same person giving one of the anonymous Legal Action Worldwide witness statements. And that person might also at the very same time be one of the anonymous persons interviewed by the FFM, as well as one or more of the NGOs on whose reports the Gambia relies. In short, we cannot know to what extent all these various documents relied on by the Gambia repeat the same information from the same people. And this concern is not hypothetical. Many of the IIMM's witnesses confirm that they were previously interviewed by other organizations. One IIMM witness says, "In 2017, right after we arrived in Bangladesh, there were a lot of people who interviewed us. I was interviewed many times, maybe more than 15 or 20 times. There were a lot of people asking questions, and we just answered." Another says, "There were many journalists and NGOs who conducted interviews immediately after the influx. There were so many people approaching us and asking questions that I can't remember them all." In fact, you will know from my presentation on Friday that one of the IIMM witnesses was also one of the FFM's interviewees. We also know that two of the IIMM witnesses are the same people who gave two of the Legal Action Worldwide statements. It also now seems apparent that 3 separate documents of fortified rights relied on by the Gambia are all based on the same interviews with the same people. Information in 2 different legal action worldwide documents is now also known to come from the same person. However, the ubiquitous anonymity prevents the full extent of such duplications being known. There's reason to think that it is far more extensive. Given the large number of people living in the camps in Bangladesh, it's unlikely that so many would have been interviewed multiple times by different organizations if these organizations genuinely selected interviewees randomly. This suggests that different organizations were somehow being consistently directed to the same groups of people in the camps for interview. Given what we know about ARSA influence in the camps, that is not purely speculative. The court has said that it must treat with caution evidentiary materials emanating from a single source. Multiple items of evidence are obviously not mutually corroborative if they are in fact both from the same source. They also cannot be treated as mutually corroborative if it cannot be known whether or not they're from the same source. Another problem is that if it cannot be known when 2 different statements are made by the same person, then it's impossible to check whether different statements made by the same person are contradictory. There have been only 4 instances where it has been possible to know that 2 different witness accounts relied on by the Gambia were in fact made by the same person. Significantly, in 3 of those instances, there are fundamental contradictions between the 2 statements. In various other of the IIMM witness statements, the witness admits that statements that they previously made to other organizations were wrong, although in the case of these other statements, it's not possible to identify a particular earlier statement or the organization to which it was given. For instance, one IIMM witness says this: "I personally did not witness any incidents of rape during the attack on my village, nor did I learn of any such incidents in Gudum Farah after the attack." This witness then goes on to speak about an earlier interview that he gave to another organization. He says, "At the time of the interviewers asked me if I saw anyone get raped. And because of what I'd seen during the attack on my village and heard from other survivors in the camps in Bangladesh, I told, redacted, that I saw Kabiya's wife being raped. But this is not true. That interview happened a long time ago, and at the time of the interview, I was heavily traumatized and exaggerated the events I saw. I did not know what I was saying. I saw Kabiya and his wife get taken away by the military, which is the truth, but I did not see her get raped. I was not told by anyone to say that Kabiya's wife was raped. I said it with my own will, because I wanted the world to know about all the atrocities that had been committed against us, because I thought the world was unaware of what happened." In other words, this witness admits to having given a deliberately false account to another organization. The name of that other organization or person to whom he spoke has been redacted by the IIMM from the witness statement, although we don't know why. The other organization might well have been the FFM, or one of the other organisations on whose reports the Gambia relies. Other IIMM witness statements also accept that the witness made inconsistent and wrong statements when speaking previously to unidentified other organisations, which again may have been the FFM or one of the other bodies on whose reports the Gambia relies. Other IIMM witness statements admit that information previously given by the witness to other organisations was mere hearsay rather than information within their own knowledge. However, the extensive anonymity makes it impossible to identify which words in which documents relied on by the Gambia are now admitted to be wrong. It's reasonable to assume that many other people who were interviewed by the FFM or other organisation on whose material the Gambia relies would now admit that things that they are recorded by those other organisations as saying are wrong if they were to be interviewed now by a professional forensic investigator. The Gambia has claimed that this pervasive anonymity has been required because witnesses are at risk from the authorities in Myanmar. Yet the Gambia has in fact presented no evidence to the court to establish such a claim, and nor has the court ever made a finding that any such objective risk exists. Even the head of the IIMM does not state that any such objective risk exists. Rather, he says that witnesses express a subjective fear of such a risk. In fact, there's a large amount of evidence that witnesses in the camps in Bangladesh are at risk from ARSA, but none at all is presented of any actual risk from the authorities of Myanmar. The fact that witnesses express a personal but unsubstantiated unwillingness to testify without anonymity does not mean that their statement should be given the evidential weight that it would have been given if the evidence was not anonymous. These two overarching features, the fact that the ultimate source of information is the people in camps in Bangladesh, and the pervasive anonymity of evidence, has a severe negative impact on the evidential weight of the material relied on by the Gambia. Mr. President, might I suggest that this might be a good moment for the coffee break?
Indeed, Mr. Speaker, before you begin the next section of your presentation, the court will observe a break of 15 minutes. The sitting is suspended.